Hello everyone. Today, Biker Justice Analyst bring you a story full of humanity and compassion. Enjoy listening.
She sent a naughty sext to a Hell's Angel by mistake minutes later. 50 bikers show up at her house. Clara sat at her kitchen counter, swirling a glass of red wine and staring at the drops as they clung to the sides. The quiet of her house felt heavier than usual tonight. Even the tick of the clock on the wall seemed to mock the stillness of her evening routine. She glanced at the stack of returned library books she'd brought home, but couldn't muster the energy to sort them. Instead, she took another sip of wine, letting the warmth spread through her chest. Another exciting Friday night, she muttered to herself, running a finger along the rim of her glass. The wine was her small rebellion against her usual structured life. A $15 bottle instead of her regular $8 selection. Her phone buzzed, making her jump. A message from Rick lit up the screen. "Hey there. Just finished working on a classic Mustang. Made me think of you. You mentioned your grandpa had one, right?" Clara smiled despite herself. Rick was nice, dependable, and clearly interested in her. They'd been texting for a few weeks after meeting through an online dating app. He was exactly the kind of guy she should want. Stable, kind, with a good job at the local garage. "Yeah, he did," she typed back. "Baby blue. Used to take me for ice cream in it every Sunday." The memory of those drives with her grandfather made her chest tight. Since losing her parents, those Sunday drives had been her anchor, her slice of normalcy. Now her life was nothing but normal, predictably, safely normal. She poured herself another glass of wine, larger this time. The bottle was already half empty, and her thoughts were starting to get fuzzy around the edges. Her phone buzzed again with Rick's response. "Would love to hear more about it. Maybe over coffee sometime?" Clara stared at the message, her finger hovering over the keyboard. Rick was safe. Rick was sensible. Rick was boring? No, that wasn't fair. She was the boring one, stuck in her routine, too scared to try anything new. The wine must have been hitting harder than she thought, because suddenly she was typing, "Maybe you could take me for a ride instead? I bet you know how to show a girl a good time." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, feeling a little thrill at her own boldness. That feeling lasted exactly 3 seconds, until she realized she'd sent the message to the wrong contact. The blood drained from her face as she saw where the message had actually gone. Mick, the bear, Dalton. She'd gotten his number at last month's Veterans Charity event at the library, where he'd been surprisingly helpful in organizing the book drive. No, she whispered, her hands shaking as she stared at the screen. Mick wasn't just any wrong number. He was a member of the Hells Angels. The wine churned in her stomach as she remembered his impressive height, the leather vest covered in patches, the way other bikers had deferred to him. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today." Now back to the story. Clara set her wine glass down with trembling fingers, watching the message status change from delivered to read. Her heart pounded in her chest as 3 dots appeared, showing he was typing a response. She held her breath, her eyes fixed on the screen, mortification and fear fighting for dominance in her wine-addled brain. What had she done? What would he think? What would he say? The dots kept appearing and disappearing, each second feeling like an eternity as she waited for his response. Clara paced her kitchen, her sock-covered feet making soft shuffling sounds against the tile floor. Every few steps, she glanced at her phone on the counter as if it might explode. The wine that had given her such confidence moments ago now felt like lead in her stomach. "Maybe he won't respond at all," she mumbled, trying to comfort herself. Maybe he'll just ignore it. But the read status beneath her message destroyed that hope. She grabbed her phone and slumped onto one of the bar stools, scrolling back through their previous texts. There weren't many, just a few brief exchanges about the veterans' book drive. His messages had been surprisingly professional, nothing like what she'd expected from a Hells Angels member. The memory of meeting him flooded back. He'd towered over her desk at the library, his presence filling the small space. But instead of being intimidating, he'd been courteous, even charming in a gruff sort of way. He'd listened intently as she explained the library's veteran support programs, taking notes in a small leather-bound notebook. Clara groaned and put her head down on the cool counter. What must he think of me now? The thought of facing him at the next veterans event made her cheeks burn. Would he tell the other bikers? Would they laugh about the librarian who'd sent him a flirty text? Her phone buzzed, and she jerked upright so fast she almost fell off the stool. Her heart hammered as she picked up the device with trembling fingers. The typing dots appeared again, disappeared, then reappeared. Clara held her breath. Was he trying to find the right words to let her down gently? Or worse, was he angry? She thought about sending another message to apologize, but her fingers felt frozen above the keyboard. What could she possibly say? Sorry, I meant to send that inappropriate message to someone else didn't sound much better than sending it in the first place. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating her curtains. Clara realized she was biting her lower lip hard enough to hurt. Finally, her phone buzzed again. The message appeared. Well, that's one way to break the ice. Don't worry. I'm not offended. You owe me now. Be ready. Clara read the message 3 times, her racing heart gradually slowing. There was no anger in his words, no mockery. Instead, she detected amusement, maybe even playfulness. She hadn't expected that. The warmth in her cheeks changed from embarrassment to something else. Interest, maybe. His response was confident but not aggressive, teasing but not cruel. It was so different from Rick's safe, predictable messages. You owe me now. Be ready. The words sent a little shiver down her spine. Ready for what? The responsible librarian in her said she should be worried, but another part, the part that had been so bored earlier, felt a spark of excitement. Clara set her phone down and pressed her cool hands to her warm cheeks. She couldn't help but smile, even as she shook her head at herself. Of all the ways she'd imagined making her life more exciting, accidentally sending a flirty text to a Hells Angels member hadn't been one of them. Clara stood frozen in her kitchen, still processing Mick's text message when she heard it. The low, distant rumble of motorcycles. At first, it was just background noise, the kind you might hear on any evening in Northern California. But the sound grew louder, closer, until it became impossible to ignore. She tilted her head, listening. This wasn't just 1 or 2 bikes passing by. The rumble had become a roar, like thunder rolling down her quiet suburban street. The wine glass on her counter vibrated slightly, and even the window panes seemed to shake with the approaching noise. No, she whispered, her eyes widening. It can't be. Clara rushed to her living room window, nearly tripping over her own feet in her haste. Her hands trembled as she pulled back the cream-colored curtain just enough to peek outside. The street lamp cast a warm glow over her front yard, illuminating the neat flower beds she'd planted last spring. Everything looked normal, peaceful even, for about 3 more seconds. Then they appeared. The first motorcycle rounded the corner onto her street, its headlight cutting through the evening darkness. Another followed, then another, and another. They kept coming, a parade of chrome and steel, their engines creating a symphony that seemed to shake the very foundation of her house. Clara's mouth went dry. She counted them as they appeared. 10, 20, 30. She lost count somewhere around 40, as they began filling her driveway and lining up along the curb in front of her house. The sound was deafening now, a wall of noise that made her ears ring. Her neighbors' porch lights began clicking on one by one. She could see Mrs. Peterson across the street, peering through her blinds. The Johnsons next door had stepped onto their front porch, their faces a mixture of concern and curiosity. Clara's hand flew to her mouth as she recognized the patches on their leather jackets. Hells Angels. These weren't just any bikers. These were members of one of the most notorious motorcycle clubs in the world, and they were parking their bikes in her driveway as casually as if she'd invited them over for dinner. The vibration of the engines suddenly ceased, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. One by one, the bikers dismounted their motorcycles with practiced ease. They were an intimidating sight. Dozens of men in leather jackets, some with long beards, others with tattoos visible on their necks and arms. They began to gather in front of her house, forming a loose semicircle on her lawn. Clara backed away from the window, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her phone felt heavy in her hand as she glanced down at Mick's message again. You owe me now. Be ready. Well, she certainly hadn't been ready for this. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in her throat. Here she was, Clara Mae Thompson, the quiet librarian who color-coded her grocery lists and went to bed at 9:30 most nights, with 50 Hells Angels bikers standing in her front yard. All because of one misplaced text message. She caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, and her auburn hair slightly mussed from running her fingers through it nervously. Part of her wanted to run upstairs and hide under her bed until they all went away. Another part wanted to march outside and demand to know what they thought they were doing, turning her quiet Thursday evening into something that belonged in a movie scene. Instead, she stood rooted to the spot, watching through her window as more bikers continued to gather on her front lawn. Clara's hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob. Through the frosted glass panel, she could see the silhouettes of leather-clad figures moving across her front lawn. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door just enough to peek through the gap. There he was, Mick, the bear Dalton, standing at the bottom of her porch steps. He was even more imposing in person than she remembered from the Veterans Charity event. His broad shoulders filled out his leather vest, and his salt and pepper beard couldn't hide the playful grin spreading across his face. "Evening, Clara," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "Hope we're not interrupting anything important." Clara opened the door a bit wider, her other hand still gripping the doorframe. This is quite a surprise." Behind Mick, the bikers were unloading coolers and grills from their saddlebags. Two burly men were setting up a folding table on her lawn, while others were arranging chairs in a semicircle. The scene was so surreal, Clara wondered if she'd fallen asleep after that second glass of wine. "Boys," Mick called out, "careful with those flowers. Clara here's got a nice garden going." A few bikers who had been close to stepping on her prized petunias quickly adjusted their paths. Clara blinked in surprise. These intimidating men in their leather jackets were being more careful with her flower beds than her regular garden service. "I don't understand," she managed to say. "Why are you all here?" Mick climbed the porch steps, stopping at a respectful distance. Up close, his eyes were a warm brown, crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "Well, after that interesting text message, we figured you might be feeling a little lonely tonight. Thought we'd make sure you feel properly welcome in the neighborhood." The sound of laughter drew Clara's attention back to her lawn. Someone had started up a portable grill, and the smell of charcoal began to fill the air. A cooler was opened, revealing sodas and water bottles, not the beer she might have expected. "Frank," Mick called out to an older man with silver hair, "you got those burgers ready yet?" "Give me 5 minutes," Frank replied, arranging patties on the grill with the expertise of someone who'd done this countless times before. Can't rush perfection. Clara's tension began to ease slightly as she watched the scene unfold. These men, despite their intimidating appearance, moved with an almost choreographed efficiency, setting up what looked like an impromptu block party on her front lawn. "I know this is unexpected," Mick said, his voice softening. "And if you want us to leave, just say the word. But I figured, since you reached out," he gave her a knowing wink, referencing her accidental text, "maybe we could turn this mistake into something memorable." Clara felt her cheeks flush at the mention of her text message, but there was no mockery in Mick's tone. Instead, she detected genuine warmth and perhaps a hint of hope. "Would you like to join us?" he asked, gesturing to the gathering. "Frank makes the best burgers in Northern California, and I promise we're a lot less scary once you get to know us." Clara looked past him at the activity in her yard. Frank was carefully tending to the grill, while other bikers were setting up paper plates and plastic utensils. A few of them waved when they caught her looking. The whole scene was simultaneously bizarre and oddly normal. Her heart was still racing, but now it wasn't entirely from fear. There was something else mixing in with her anxiety, curiosity about these men, about Mick, and about this unexpected turn her quiet Thursday evening had taken. Clara shifted her weight from one foot to the other, still standing in her doorway as she watched the scene unfold in her front yard. The evening air carried the mouth-watering aroma of grilling burgers, and the sound of easy laughter drifted up from the gathering of leather-clad figures. "Come on down," Mick said, extending his hand toward her. "I promise we don't bite." Clara hesitated, her fingers playing with the hem of her cardigan. "I'm not exactly dressed for a party," she mumbled, glancing down at her comfortable but plain outfit, jeans and a soft blue sweater. "You look just fine," Mick assured her. His warm brown eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "Besides, we're not exactly wearing tuxedos ourselves." Taking a deep breath, Clara stepped onto her porch and carefully closed the door behind her. Each step down felt like a tiny victory over her racing heart. As she reached the bottom, Frank called out from his position at the grill. "Hope you're hungry, miss," he said, flipping a burger with expert precision. "These are my specialty, secret family recipe passed down through generations." "That's what he always says," another biker chuckled. "But we all know he got it off the Food Network." "Hey now, Tommy," Frank protested good-naturedly. "A man's gotta have some mysteries." Clara couldn't help but smile at their banter. Mick guided her toward a cluster of chairs where several bikers were sharing stories. As they approached, the men shifted to make room, offering her a comfortable camping chair. "This here's Clara," Mick announced to the group. "She's the librarian over at the public library." "A librarian?" One of the younger bikers perked up. "My kid's been loving those reading programs you all do on Saturday mornings. I'm Jake, by the way." Clara blinked in surprise. "The little girl with the princess backpack? That's your daughter?" Jake beamed proudly. "That's my Sophie. She talks about story time all week long." As Clara settled into her chair, she found herself surrounded by unexpected conversations. These men, who had seemed so intimidating at first, shared stories about their families, their work with veterans' charities, and their everyday lives. One biker talked about his job as an accountant, while another discussed his passion for gardening. Mick sat beside her, occasionally adding his own comments, but mostly letting her adjust to the atmosphere. His presence felt steady and reassuring, like an anchor in this surreal situation. Frank appeared with 2 paper plates loaded with burgers and all the fixings. "Here you go," he said, handing them to Clara and Mick. "Best burgers this side of the Mississippi." "That's not saying much, Frank," someone called out. "You've never been east of Nevada." The group erupted in laughter, and Clara found herself joining in. The burger was actually delicious, and the casual atmosphere was starting to feel less strange by the minute. "So," Mick said softly, leaning closer so she could hear him over the chatter, "still scared of us?" Clara took another bite of her burger to hide her embarrassed smile. "I'm still not sure what to make of all this," she admitted, gesturing at the impromptu gathering in her front yard. "But I guess you're not quite as terrifying as I first thought." A burst of laughter drew their attention as Tommy began telling an animated story about a charity run gone hilariously wrong. Clara found herself caught between amusement at the tale and amazement at how quickly her quiet evening had transformed into this unexpected block party. The evening had settled into a comfortable rhythm as the party continued in Clara's front yard. She found herself drifting toward the grill where Mick stood, tending to the last batch of burgers. The warm glow of the coals cast flickering shadows across his face, softening his rugged features. "So," Mick said with a playful grin, "about that text message." Clara felt her cheeks grow warm. "Oh gosh, can we please pretend that never happened? Are you kidding? That's the most interesting introduction I've had in years." He flipped a burger with expert precision. "Usually people just shake my hand and try not to look scared." "I was mortified when I realized what I'd done," Clara admitted, wrapping her arms around herself against the cooling evening air. "I thought you'd be angry." Mick chuckled, the sound deep and genuine. "Life's too short to get upset over honest mistakes. Besides," he added with a wink, "it was actually kind of sweet. Definitely made my day more interesting." Clara groaned and covered her face with her hands. "I can't believe this is happening. I'm usually so careful, so organized." "Maybe you needed a little chaos in your life," Mick suggested. Closing the grill lid, he turned to face her fully, his expression curious. "What made you decide to become a librarian?" "I've always loved books," Clara said, grateful for the change of subject. "They were my escape after my parents passed away. The library became my safe place." She paused, surprised at how easily the words came out. "But what about you? How did you get involved with?" She gestured vaguely at the gathering. Mick's expression grew more serious. "After my military service, I struggled to find my place. A lot of us do." He absently rubbed the back of his neck. "The brotherhood here gave me purpose, especially when we started focusing on veteran outreach." "What kind of outreach do you do?" Clara asked, genuinely interested. "We organize fundraisers, help vets find housing, connect them with mental health resources." His voice carried a note of pride. "Last month we raised enough money to help 3 veterans get service dogs." Clara watched as his eyes lit up. "Talking about the work. That's amazing. I had no idea you did all that." "Most people don't look past the leather and bikes," Mick admitted. "But every one of these guys has a story, and most of them involve wanting to give back somehow." He gestured toward Frank, who was now telling animated stories to a small group. "Frank there? He runs a mentorship program for young vets struggling with PTSD. Helped save my life when I first got back." "Is that why you got involved?" Clara asked softly. Mick nodded, his expression thoughtful. "When you've been through hell, you understand how important it is to have someone reach out a hand. Sometimes all it takes is one person showing they care to change everything." He smiled slightly. "Plus, It gives us an excuse to ride our bikes and look tough while doing good deeds. Clara laughed at that, and Mick's smile widened. The comfortable silence that followed was interrupted only by the crackling of the grill and the distant sound of laughter from the other guests. "Tell me more about the veteran programs," Clara said, settling into a nearby chair. "I'd like to understand better." Mick pulled up another chair, turning it backward before straddling it. His face softened as he began sharing stories about their community work, the successes they'd had, and the challenges they still faced. The sun had long since set, and the temperature had dropped enough that Clara could see her breath in the cool night air. The party was winding down naturally, with bikers collecting paper plates and disposing of empty bottles and trash bags. The rumble of motorcycles starting up filled the previously quiet neighborhood as small groups began to depart, each giving Clara a friendly wave or nod as they left. Clara stood on her front porch, hugging herself against the chill, watching as Frank helped others pack up the portable grills and fold the chairs they'd brought. The evening had been surreal, nothing like what she'd expected when she'd first heard the motorcycles approaching her house. Mick approached her, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. He carried his leather jacket over one arm, and even in the dim porch light, Clara could see the various patches and emblems that decorated it. The sight reminded her of just how different their worlds were. "Quite a night, huh?" he said, leaning against the porch railing. "Sorry if we disturbed your neighbors." Clara shook her head. "Actually, Mrs. Peterson from next door came over earlier and got 3 recipes from your friends. I think you've won over the neighborhood." Mick laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "We tend to have that effect once people get to know us." He paused, seeming to consider something. "Speaking of getting to know us better." Clara raised an eyebrow, waiting. "We've got this fundraiser coming up next weekend," he continued. "It's for a veterans shelter we're helping to renovate. Good cause, good food, good music." He gave her a playful smile. "And since you do owe me for that text message, I think it's only fair you show up." Clara felt her cheeks warm at the reminder of her earlier mistake. "I don't know," she hedged, fidgeting with the sleeve of her sweater. "I'm not really sure I'd fit in at something like that." "You fit in just fine tonight," Mick pointed out. "Besides, it's not just bikers. Local businesses sponsor it, families come out. It's a community thing." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a slightly crumpled flyer. "Saturday, starting at noon. We do a barbecue, live music, silent auction. All the proceeds go directly to the shelter." Clara took the flyer, studying the colorful print that advertised the annual Veterans Hope Ride and Festival. The image showed families, bikers, and veterans all mingling together, completely different from what she'd imagined a biker event would look like. She started, then stopped, uncertain. "You don't have to decide right now," Mick said gently. "But you better show up. A deal's a deal, right?" Frank called out from the yard. "Mick, we're about ready to head out." Mick pushed off from the railing. "Think about it," he said, shrugging on his jacket. "It'd be nice to see you there." Clara watched as he joined the remaining bikers, all of them mounting their motorcycles with practiced ease. The engines roared to life, and soon they were heading down her quiet street, leaving only tire marks on her driveway as evidence they'd ever been there. Standing alone on her porch, Clara looked down at the flyer in her hands. The evening had challenged everything she'd thought she knew about bikers, about Mick, and maybe even about herself. The idea of attending the fundraiser made her nervous, but there was also an undeniable flutter of excitement in her stomach. She bit her lip, wondering what kind of world she was about to step into. Everything about this situation was so far removed from her usual life of quiet reading rooms and organized card catalogs. Yet, somehow, she couldn't bring herself to completely dismiss the idea. Clara's hands gripped her steering wheel tightly as she pulled into the crowded parking lot of Veterans Memorial Park. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, and the smell of barbecue filled the air. Rows of gleaming motorcycles lined one side of the lot, while minivans and family cars occupied the other. A striking visual of 2 worlds coming together. Her heart thumped as she stepped out of her sensible sedan, smoothing down her casual blue sundress. She'd spent an hour that morning debating what to wear, wanting to look appropriate without seeming like she was trying too hard. "You made it," Mick's voice carried across the parking lot. He strode toward her, wearing his usual leather vest but with a bright blue event staff badge pinned to it. His familiar grin helped ease some of her tension. "I did owe you," Clara replied, managing a small smile. "Though I'm still mortified about that text." Mick chuckled. "Best mistake I've gotten in a while." "Come on, Let me introduce you to everyone properly this time, without the surprise factor. He guided her through the gathering crowd with a gentle hand on her back. Children ran past with face paint and balloons, while volunteers in matching t-shirts set up game booths and information tables. "Hey, Frank," Mick called out to the older biker, who was organizing raffle tickets at a booth. "Look who showed up." Frank's weathered face creased into a warm smile. "Well, if it isn't our text message queen. Glad you could make it, Clara." Clara felt her cheeks warm, but Frank's kind eyes held no judgment. He introduced her to his wife Sarah, who immediately enlisted Clara's help in organizing the silent auction items. As they worked, more bikers approached to say hello. There was Big Joe, who turned out to be a middle school math teacher, and Thunder, a soft-spoken man who owned a local bakery. Each one had a story that surprised her, breaking down her preconceptions one interaction at a time. "See? We're not so scary in daylight," Mick said, returning with 2 cups of lemonade. He handed one to Clara and motioned toward a quiet spot under a nearby oak tree. They walked together, weaving through families and veterans who all seemed to know Mick, greeting him with respect and genuine warmth. Under the tree's shade, Clara could see the full scope of the event. The music stage being set up, the food trucks arriving, the growing crowd of people from all walks of life. "This is amazing," she said, gesturing to the scene before them. "I had no idea it would be like this." Mick's expression grew serious. "You know, when I first came back from deployment, I was lost. Couldn't sleep, couldn't connect with anyone who hadn't been there." He paused, taking a sip of his lemonade. "The VA does what it can, but there are so many guys who fall through the cracks. That's where we come in." Clara watched as he pointed out different areas of Cole. "The festival, that building over there, that's the shelter we're renovating. Every dollar we raise today goes directly to giving veterans a safe place to stay while they get back on their feet. We're not just throwing a party, we're building a community." His passion was evident in every word, and Clara found herself seeing him in a new light. This wasn't just some tough guy playing at charity. This was someone who had found his purpose in helping others. "Most people see the patches and the bikes and make assumptions," Mick continued, his voice quieter now. "But this is who we really are. We're family to those who lost theirs, home to those still searching for one." Clara wandered through the festival grounds, taking in the sights and sounds of children laughing, music playing, and conversations flowing. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass as she made her way to a quiet corner where Frank sat at a picnic table, taking a break from his raffle duties. "Mind if I join you?" Clara asked, holding up 2 bottles of water. Frank's weathered face broke into a gentle smile. "Pull up a seat, young lady." He accepted the water with a nod of thanks. "How are you finding our little shindig?" "It's not what I expected," Clara admitted, settling onto the wooden bench. "I mean, everything is so organized. Professional." Frank chuckled, the sound deep and warm. "You thought it'd be all beer and chaos, didn't you?" His eyes held no judgment, only understanding. "Most people do. That's okay. We're used to it." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "I guess I did have some preconceptions. Let me tell you something about assumptions," Frank said, adjusting his vest. "Back in '69, I was fresh off the chopper in Vietnam. Scared kid, barely 20. This gruff sergeant walks up to me, covered in mud, looking mean as a snake. I thought, this guy's gonna make my life hell." He paused, taking a sip of water. "Turned out to be the man who saved my life. 3 times over, taught me everything I needed to know to survive." Clara leaned forward, drawn in by his story. "What happened to him?" "He took a bullet meant for me in '71. Frank's voice grew quiet. "That's the thing about war. It shows you who people really are, strips away all the surface stuff. That sergeant? He had a wife and 3 kids back home. Wrote them poetry every night. Never judged a soul." A comfortable silence fell between them as Clara absorbed his words. In the background, she could see Mick helping a veteran in a wheelchair navigate through the crowd, his usual tough demeanor softened by genuine care. "You know," Frank continued, "after I came home, I was lost. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't relate to anyone who hadn't been there." He gestured to the bikers scattered throughout the crowd. "These guys? They gave me purpose again. We might look rough, but every person here has a story. Every one of them has fought their own battles." Clara watched as a group of bikers helped set up chairs for elderly veterans arriving for the ceremony. Another was teaching a young child how to make paper airplanes, his tattooed arms gentle as he guided tiny hands through the folds. "Take Mick, for example," Frank said, following her gaze. "Man's got a heart bigger than that bike of his. Spends every free moment organizing these events, visiting VA hospitals, helping veterans navigate the system. He just doesn't advertise it." Clara felt something shift inside her as she observed the scene around her. The leather vests and tattoos that had once seemed intimidating now looked different, like badges of belonging, symbols of a brotherhood forged through shared experiences and mutual understanding. "I think I'm starting to see that," she said softly, watching Mick laugh with a group of veterans. "There's so much more here than meets the eye." Frank nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "That's the thing about life, Clara. Sometimes the roughest exterior holds the gentlest heart. You just have to be willing to look past the surface." The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks as Clara helped stack empty chairs after the ceremony. Most of the crowd had dispersed, leaving behind a peaceful, quiet, broken only by distant conversations and the occasional rumble of motorcycles. Mick approached her, his leather vest catching the last rays of sunlight. "Hey," he said softly. "Got a minute?" Clara nodded, setting down the folding chair she was holding. Mick gestured toward a quiet spot near a cluster of oak trees, away from the cleanup activity. They settled onto a wooden bench, the old wood creaking under their weight. "I wanted to thank you for coming today," Mick said, his usual confidence giving way to something more vulnerable. "It means a lot when people show up and really try to understand what we're doing here." Clara smiled, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm glad I came. Frank was just telling me about his experiences." Mick nodded, his eyes distant. "Frank's been through hell and back." He fell quiet for a moment, his fingers absently tracing the patches on his vest. "We all have our stories, I guess. Mine started in Afghanistan." Clara watched his face, noting how the tough exterior seemed to soften as he spoke. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to," she said gently. "No, I want to." Mick took a deep breath. 3 tours. Lost some good friends over there. When I came back," he paused, his jaw tightening. "Everything was different. Couldn't sleep, couldn't handle crowds. Simple things like fireworks or a car backfiring would send me right back there." Clara's heart ached as she watched him struggle with the words. She remained silent, giving him space to continue. "The VA helped some, but it wasn't enough. I was angry all the time, pushing everyone away." His voice grew quieter. "Then one day, I met Frank at a support group. He invited me to ride with the Angels, said maybe the road could help clear my head." The evening breeze rustled through the oak leaves above them. In the distance, someone laughed, the sound carrying across the empty festival grounds. "First time I got on that bike," Mick continued, a small smile touching his lips. Something clicked. The wind, the engine, the brotherhood. It gave me purpose again. These guys understood what I was going through without me having to explain it. They'd been there too. Clara watched as Mick's shoulders relaxed, his guard lowering further. "That's when we started organizing these events, helping other vets find their way back, just like Frank helped me. Some people see the leather and the patches and think we're nothing but trouble." He turned to look at her directly. "But this is what keeps me going. Giving back, making a difference. It helps me deal with my own demons." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by his honesty. The man before her wasn't the intimidating biker she'd first imagined. Instead, she saw someone who had faced tremendous pain and channeled it into helping others. Someone who understood vulnerability and strength weren't mutually exclusive. Every veteran we help through the system, every fundraiser we organize, every life we touch, it matters, Mick said, his voice growing stronger. "It reminds me that even the darkest experiences can lead to something meaningful." Clara found herself reaching out, placing her hand gently on his arm. The leather of his vest was warm under her fingers. "Thank you for sharing that with me," she said softly. "I think I understand now, what you do here. It's beautiful." Mick covered her hand with his, rough and calloused but incredibly gentle. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Clara saw him, really saw him, for who he was. The small coffee shop buzzed with mid-morning activity. Clara sat at a corner table, watching steam rise from her untouched latte. The bell above the door chimed, and Rick walked in, his familiar blue mechanic's shirt neat and pressed. "Hey there, stranger," Rick said, leaning down to kiss her cheek before sliding into the seat across from her. His smile was warm and comfortable, like a well-worn sweater. I've missed you. Clara managed a small smile, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. Sorry, I've been busy lately. There's been a lot going on. So I've heard. Rick's tone shifted slightly. Someone said they saw you at that biker fundraiser yesterday. Must have been quite different from your usual library events. Clara stirred her coffee, watching the foam swirl. It was actually really nice. They're doing important work for veterans. Veterans? Rick raised his eyebrows. I thought the Hells Angels were just about causing trouble. Since when are you interested in motorcycle gangs? They're not what people think, Clara said, feeling defensive. Mick explained how they help veterans navigate the system, raise money for medical bills. Mick, Rick interrupted, his face tightening. The big guy with all the tattoos? You're on a first-name basis with him now? Clara felt her cheeks warm. He's been very kind. They all have. Kind isn't exactly the word most people use to describe the Hells Angels, Rick said, his voice carrying an edge she'd never heard before. He reached across the table, taking her hand. Look, I care about you, Clara. I just don't want to see you getting mixed up with the wrong crowd. Clara pulled her hand back, remembering how Mick had opened up to her last night, the raw honesty in his voice as he shared his story. You don't even know them, Rick. And you do? After what, 2 meetings? Rick's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. He lowered it again. I've lived in this town my whole life. I know their reputation. Clara felt frustration building in her chest. Maybe reputations aren't always right. Maybe there's more to people than what others say about them. Rick leaned back in his chair, studying her face. You've changed lately. Ever since that text mix-up, this isn't about the text, Clara interrupted, though her heart skipped at the memory. It's about not judging people before you know them. I know you, Clara, Rick said softly. You're not the type to hang around with bikers. You like quiet evenings and book clubs. Safe, normal things. His words hit Clara like a splash of cold water. Was that really all he saw when he looked at her? Someone safe and predictable? She thought about how alive she'd felt at the fundraiser, listening to stories, feeling part of something bigger than herself. She thought about Mick's passionate dedication to helping others, the electricity she felt when their eyes met. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think, she said quietly. Rick's face fell. Clara, what's happening here? We were doing so well, and now suddenly you're distant. Is it because of him? Because of Mick? Clara stared into her. Coffee, now gone cold. The truth was, she didn't know exactly what was happening. She only knew that something had shifted inside her, like a door opening to possibilities she'd never considered before. Rick represented everything stable and secure in her life. But when she thought about Mick, her heart raced with an excitement she couldn't ignore. I just need some time to figure things out, she said finally, unable to meet Rick's hurt expression. Clara's phone buzzed on her desk at the library. Rick's name flashed across the screen, making her stomach tighten with guilt. She answered, trying to keep her voice steady. Hey, Rick, she said, moving away from the circulation desk for privacy. Clara, I've been thinking about our coffee chat. Rick's voice was warm and hopeful. Let me take you to dinner tonight. That new Italian place downtown just opened. Clara hesitated, her free hand fidgeting with a loose thread on her cardigan. The image of Mick's understanding smile from the Baudelaire fundraiser flashed through her mind, making her chest ache. Sure, she said finally, the word feeling heavy in her mouth. That sounds nice. Great. I'll pick you up at 7? I'll meet you there, Clara said quickly, needing the space to think. I might work a little late. After hanging up, Clara leaned against a bookshelf, surrounded by the comforting smell of old books. She should be excited about dinner with Rick. He was stable, kind, and clearly cared about her. Instead, her thoughts kept drifting to Mick's deep laugh, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The rest of her workday passed in a blur. At home, Clara changed 3 times before settling on a simple blue dress. She arrived at the restaurant 5 minutes early, smoothing her hair nervously as she waited outside. Rick appeared right on time, wearing a pressed button-down shirt and holding a small bouquet of yellow roses. You look beautiful, he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. The restaurant was cozy, with white tablecloths and flickering candles. As they settled into their seats, Clara noticed how much effort Rick had put into the evening. It only made her feel worse. I got us a bottle of that wine you like, Rick said, pouring her a glass of Pinot Grigio, the one you always order at Mario's. That's thoughtful, Clara said, taking a small sip. She should have felt touched that he remembered her wine preference, but instead, She found herself thinking about the beer she'd shared with Mick at the fundraiser, how natural and unforced everything had felt. "Clara?" Rick's voice pulled her back to the present. "You seemed miles away." "Sorry," she mumbled, picking up her menu. "Just tired from work." As they ordered and their appetizers arrived, Rick kept the conversation flowing, telling her about a difficult repair job at the shop and asking about her day at the library. Clara tried to focus, to be present, but her responses felt mechanical. "I was thinking," Rick said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Maybe we could plan a weekend getaway soon. Just the two of us. My cousin has a cabin up in Lake Tahoe." Clara stared at their joined hands. Rick's fingers were clean and smooth, so different from Mick's calloused ones. "That's a big step," she said carefully. "Isn't that where we're heading?" Rick squeezed her hand. "I care about you, Clara. I want to build something real with you." The sincerity in his voice made Clara's chest tighten. She should want this, the romantic dinner, the weekend plans, the future Rick was offering. Instead, she found herself wondering what Mick was doing right now, if he was thinking about her too. "Can we just—" Clara pulled her hand back gently, pretending to need it for cutting her chicken. "Can we just enjoy dinner?" Rick's face fell slightly, but he nodded. As he launched into another story about work, Clara found her attention wandering again, guilt gnawing at her conscience. Rick deserved someone who could be fully present, who wasn't constantly thinking about someone else. Clara pushed open the door of Joe's diner, the bell jingling overhead. The familiar smell of coffee and pancakes wrapped around her like a warm blanket. After a restless night thinking about her dinner with Rick, she'd decided to treat herself to breakfast before heading to work. "Just one?" the hostess asked, grabbing a menu. Before Clara could answer, a deep voice called out from a corner booth. "Clara?" Her heart skipped as she turned to see Mick sitting alone, a newspaper spread out beside his coffee cup. He wore a black t-shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders, his leather vest hanging on the hook beside him. "Join me?" he asked, folding the paper away. Clara hesitated for just a moment before nodding to the hostess. "I guess not just one after all." As she slid into the booth opposite Mick, she noticed the reading glasses tucked into his shirt pocket. Something about that small detail, so ordinary and unexpected, made her smile. "Didn't expect to see you here," Mick said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You hiding from someone?" Clara laughed, relaxing despite herself. "Just treating myself to breakfast. The library's coffee machine broke yesterday. Again? Maybe I should take a look at it." Mick raised an eyebrow. "I'm pretty good with my hands." The waitress appeared, saving Clara from responding to that loaded statement. She ordered coffee and French toast, while Mick asked for a refill. "How've you been?" he asked once they were alone again. "Haven't seen you since the fundraiser." Clara wrapped her hands around her coffee mug when it arrived, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "Good. Busy with work mostly." She paused, then added, "The fundraiser was really amazing, by the way. I had no idea you all did so much for the community." Mick's expression softened. "Speaking of which, we've got another one coming up next weekend. Supporting local veterans, families." He stirred his coffee slowly. "You should come. Frank was asking about you." "Oh, Clara traced the rim of her mug with her finger. "I'm not sure. I'd have to check my schedule." "No pressure," Mick said easily, but something in his eyes made Clara's breath catch. "Just thought you might want to see what else we're about." Their breakfast arrived, and they fell into comfortable conversation about books. Mick was surprisingly well read, and motorcycle maintenance. Clara found herself laughing more than she had in weeks. As they were finishing up, Clara's phone buzzed. Rick's name flashed on the screen, and she quickly silenced it. "Something important?" Mick asked, noticing her reaction. "No, just..." Clara tucked the phone away. "Just someone I need to call back later." They split the check despite Mick's protests, and as they stood to leave, Clara's phone buzzed again. Rick's text read, "We need to talk about us. Can you meet me tonight?" Standing in the doorway of the diner, Clara looked up at Mick. He was watching her with that quiet intensity that made her feel seen in ways Rick never had. "Think about the fundraiser," he said softly. "No strings attached. Just good people doing good things." Clara nodded, her phone feeling heavy in her pocket. "I will." As Mick walked to his bike and Clara headed for her car, her phone buzzed a third time. Rick again, more insistent. "Please, Clara, I really need to see you. Tonight?" She stared at the message, feeling the weight of the choice before her. Rick represented everything safe and sensible in her life. But as she watched Mick swing his leg over his motorcycle, she couldn't ignore the way her heart raced at the thought of his world. Wild and unpredictable, but somehow more real than anything she'd known before. Clara watched as Mick started his motorcycle, the engine rumbling to life. Before he could pull away, she found herself walking toward him, her phone still clutched in her hand. "Mick, wait," she called out over the engine's purr. He cut the engine and looked at her expectantly, those kind eyes making her heart flutter. The morning sun caught the silver in his beard, and Clara couldn't help but notice how different he looked from Rick's clean-cut appearance. She took a deep breath. "I want to be honest with you. Things are complicated right now." Mick planted his boots firmly on the ground, giving her his full attention. The parking lot was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and the diner's kitchen sounds drifting through an open window. "Rick, the mechanic I mentioned before, he's been..." Clara struggled to find the right words. "We've been seeing each other, sort of, and now he wants to get serious. But I'm not sure what I want anymore." Mick nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "And my being around isn't making things any clearer, I'm guessing." Clara let out a small laugh. "No, not really." A warm breeze rustled through the way, trees lining the parking lot, carrying the scent of summer flowers from the diner's window boxes. Mick adjusted his position on the bike, turning to face her more directly. "Look, Clara," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I like you. You're different from anyone I've met in a long time." He paused, scratching his beard thoughtfully. "But I'm not here to complicate your life or pressure you into anything." Clara felt her shoulders relax slightly. "I appreciate that. It's just, everything's happening so fast. First that text message, then the party at my house, the fundraiser." She shook her head. "It's a lot to process." "Take your time," Mick said, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm not going anywhere." The simple statement held such certainty that Clara felt something loosen in her chest. She'd been so worried about making the wrong choice, about disappointing someone, that she hadn't considered she might have time to figure things out. "You don't have to decide anything right now," Mick continued. "The fundraiser invitation stands, but there's no pressure. And if you need space to sort things out with Rick, I understand that too." Clara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly grateful for Mick's steady presence. "Thank you. I think I do need some time to think." "Just remember something," Mick said, his voice taking on a softer tone. "Whatever you decide, make sure it's what you want, not what you think you should want." His words hit home, making Clara realize how much of her life had been spent doing what seemed sensible, rather than what made her happy. She nodded, unable to find the right words to respond. Mick started his bike again, the engine coming to life with a low rumble. "You know where to find me if you need anything," he said, giving her one last warm smile before pulling away. Clara stood in the parking lot, watching until Mick's bike disappeared around the corner. Her phone buzzed again in her hand. Another message from Rick, but for the first time, she felt okay about not responding immediately. She needed time to think, to sort through her feelings without pressure from either man. Walking back to her car, Clara felt both lighter and more uncertain than before. Mick's patience had given her permission to step back and really consider what she wanted. Now she just had to figure out exactly what that was. Clara sat in her favorite reading chair, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold on the side table. The sun had set hours ago, but she couldn't bring herself to turn on more than her small reading lamp. The dim light suited her mood as she tried to untangle her thoughts. Her cat, Pepper, curled up in her lap, purring softly. Clara stroked his black fur absently while staring out the window at the streetlights. The quiet evening felt like a stark contrast to the rumbling motorcycles and laughter that had filled her yard just weeks ago. "What am I doing, Pepper?" she whispered. The cat blinked up at her with sleepy, yellow eyes. She thought about Rick. Dependable, steady Rick. He represented everything she thought she wanted. Stability, normalcy, a clear path forward. Their coffee dates were pleasant, their conversations comfortable. But lately, that comfort felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. Clara took a sip of her now cold tea and grimaced. Getting up to heat it would mean disturbing Pepper, so she set it back down with a sigh. Her mind drifted to Mick, and she felt that familiar flutter in her stomach. He was nothing like the men she usually dated, nothing like what she thought she wanted. Yet there was something about him that made her feel more alive than she had in years. It wasn't just his rugged appearance, or the excitement of his lifestyle. It was the way he looked at her, really looked at her, when she spoke. The way he showed such genuine care for others through his charity work. The patience he'd shown her, even now. Mom and Dad would probably have a heart attack, she said to Pepper, thinking of her parents' traditional values. But then she remembered something her grandmother used to say. The biggest regrets come from the chances we were too afraid to take. Clara reached for her phone, scrolling through her recent messages. Rick had texted her 3 times today, each message carrying an undercurrent of anxiety, of need. She hadn't responded yet, and the guilt gnawed at her. Then there was Mick's last message from 2 days ago. A simple invitation to the next Veterans fundraiser, followed by, no pressure, just know you're welcome. The difference between their approaches struck her. Rick seemed to need something from her. Validation, perhaps. But Mick just offered opportunities, leaving the choice entirely up to her. Clara thought about her life at the library, surrounded by stories of adventure and romance. How many times had she lost herself in tales of people taking chances, following their hearts? Yet here she was, playing it safe, just like always. She thought about the fundraiser, about Frank's wise eyes and the way the other bikers had welcomed her without judgment. She thought about how natural it felt to talk with Mick, how she didn't have to pretend to be someone she wasn't. Pepper stirred in her lap, stretching and jumping down. Clara watched him pad across the room, his tail held high. Even her cat seemed to know what he wanted without second-guessing himself. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Mick. She picked it up, her heart beating a little faster as she read. Frank's asking about you. Says the fundraiser won't be the same without his favorite librarian. Hope you'll consider coming. Clara's finger hovered over the message. The familiar urge to play it safe tugged at her. But something stronger pushed back. A desire to stop watching life from the sidelines. Taking a deep breath, she typed out her response, agreeing to meet him at the next event. It was time to face her feelings head-on, whatever that might mean. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the community center parking lot as Clara pulled up in her sensible sedan. Motorcycles lined the entrance, their chrome gleaming. This time the sight didn't intimidate her. Instead, she felt a flutter of excitement. Inside, the Veterans fundraiser was in full swing. The familiar faces of bikers she'd met before nodded in greeting as she made her way through the crowd. Frank spotted her first, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. Well, if it isn't our favorite librarian, he said, giving her a gentle side hug. Mick's over by the registration table. Been checking the door every 5 minutes, though he'd never admit it. Clara felt her cheeks warm as she looked where Frank pointed. Sure enough, there was Mick, his broad shoulders visible above the crowd. He was helping an elderly veteran fill out some paperwork, listening intently with that focused expression she'd come to recognize. As if sensing her presence, Mick looked up. His face brightened, and he excused himself from the table. You made it, he said, approaching her. His voice was casual, but his eyes held genuine warmth. I did promise, Clara replied, surprised by how natural it felt to be here. They found a quiet corner near the refreshment table, away from the main bustle of the event. Mick handed her a cup of coffee, remembering how she liked it. 2 sugars, no cream. How's the library? He asked, leaning against the wall. Same as always. Though I did start a veterans reading program, Clara admitted. After meeting everyone here, I thought it might help. Mick's expression softened. That means a lot. Some of these guys, reading helps them cope, you know? Takes them somewhere else for a while. They talked about their lives, really talked. Mick shared stories about his time in the service. Not just the funny moments, but the hard ones too. Clara opened up about losing her parents young, about finding solace in books and structure. Sometimes I think I hide behind my routines, she confessed, studying her coffee cup. It's safer that way. Safer isn't always better, Mick said quietly. Trust me, I learned that the hard way. After coming home, I tried to shut everything out. The angels. They helped me find purpose again, showed me it was okay to live fully, even with the scars. Clara watched him as he spoke, noticing the way his hands moved, how his eyes held both strength and vulnerability. She felt something shift inside her, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. What about you? He asked. What do you want out of life? The question hung between them. Clara took a deep breath, considering her answer carefully. I used to think I knew. A quiet life, predictable and safe, but lately. She paused, gathering her courage. Lately I'm not so sure that's enough anymore. Mick nodded, not pushing for more, A comfortable silence settled between them as they watched. The crowd. Someone had started playing guitar in the corner, and several veterans were sharing stories and laughs. Clara felt it then. The warmth spreading through her chest. The way her heart seemed to speed up and slow down at the same time when she looked at Mick. It was terrifying and exhilarating, like standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. She wasn't ready to name it yet, this feeling that was growing stronger each time they met. But she knew she wanted to explore it, to see where it might lead, even if the path wasn't as clearly marked as she was used to. When Mick asked if she'd like to help out at the next event, Clara didn't hesitate before saying yes. Clara was curled up on her couch with a book when the rumble of motorcycles broke through her quiet evening. She marked her place and went to peek through the curtains. Her heart skipped when she recognized Mick's broad shoulders as he dismounted his bike, followed by Frank and 3 other bikers she'd met at the fundraiser. They carried paper bags from Joe's BBQ, the smell of smoked meat wafting through her front yard. Clara smoothed her oversized sweater and ran fingers through her messy bun before opening the door. "Hope we're not interrupting," Mick said, holding up the bags with a gentle smile. "The guys and I were grabbing dinner, and I remembered you saying you lived nearby." Frank chuckled behind him. "What he means is, he suggested we come this way even though it's completely out of the way." Clara felt her cheeks warm as she looked at her unexpected visitors. The other bikers, Tom, Eddie, and Jake, stood awkwardly on her porch, shifting their weight from foot to foot. "We brought enough to share," Mick added quickly. "But if you're busy—" "No, I'm not busy," Clara interrupted, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Her quiet evening suddenly seemed lonely in comparison to the warmth these men brought with them. My place is kind of a mess. Sweetheart, we live in garages half the time," Frank said with a laugh. "Trust me, we're not here to judge your housekeeping." Clara stepped back, opening her door wider. "Then I guess you better come in before the food gets cold." The bikers filed into her small living room, their leather jackets and boots looking oddly out of place among her floral throw pillows and stacked books. But instead of feeling intimidated, Clara found herself relaxing as they made themselves comfortable. Tom and Eddie started setting out containers of food on her coffee table, while Jake produced paper plates and plastic utensils from one of the bags. Frank settled into her reading chair, immediately spotting her collection of classic literature on the nearby shelf. "Hemingway fan?" he asked, nodding toward the books. "Some of his work," Clara replied, grateful for the easy conversation starter. "Though I prefer Steinbeck." Mick touched her elbow gently. "Mind if I grab some water for everyone?" "Oh, of course," Clara said, leading him to her small kitchen. Away from the others, the space felt more intimate. Mick moved carefully in her kitchen, like he was conscious of taking up too much space. "I hope this is okay," he said quietly, helping her gather glasses. "I know we should have called first." Clara found herself studying his profile as he filled the glasses. The strong line of his jaw, usually so intimidating, now seemed softer in her kitchen's warm light. "It's more than okay," she admitted. "I was just sitting here feeling sorry for myself, actually. This is nice." Mick turned to face her, their bodies close in the narrow kitchen. "Yeah?" His voice was soft, hopeful. "Yeah," Clara replied, suddenly very aware of how near he was. She could smell leather and something spicy. His aftershave, maybe. "I'm starting to really enjoy these surprises." The sounds of the others laughing in her living room filtered in. But in the kitchen, it felt like she and Mick were in their own little world. He reached out slowly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers barely grazing her cheek. "Then I'll have to keep surprising you," he said with a gentle smile. Clara's heart fluttered as she realized that she was looking forward to exactly that. Clara was organizing books at the library when her phone buzzed. Rick's name flashed across the screen. She stared at it for a moment, guilt twisting in her stomach. She'd been avoiding his calls for days, unsure how to handle the situation. After 3 rings, she finally answered. "Hello? So you are alive," Rick's voice came through, tight with tension. "I was starting to wonder, since you haven't returned any of my messages." Clara sighed, sliding into her chair behind the checkout desk. "I'm sorry, Rick. I've been busy?" He cut in. "Yeah, that's what your text said. But somehow you've had time to hang out with those bikers. Mrs. Peterson told me she saw you with them at Joe's BBQ last night." Clara felt her face flush. Small towns. Nothing stayed secret for long. "Rick, No, Clara. I'm done with the excuses." His voice cracked slightly. "I think I deserve a straight answer." What's going on with us? Because from where I'm standing, it feels like you're pulling away, and I want to know why. Clara closed her eyes, pressing her fingers to her temple. You're right. We should talk about this properly. Face to face. Meet me at the diner in an hour, Rick said firmly. I'm on my lunch break. I can't leave work right now. Then after work. 5 o'clock. Please, Clara. I need to know where I stand. Clara glanced at the clock on the wall. 2:30 p.m. Okay, she said softly. 5 o'clock. The rest of her shift crawled by. Clara tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting between Rick's hurt voice and Mick's gentle smile from the night before. By closing time, her stomach was in knots. The bell above the diner's door chimed as Clara walked in. Rick was already there, sitting, in their usual booth by the window. His face was drawn, his usually neat mechanic's uniform wrinkled like he'd been running his hands over it nervously. Hi, Clara said, sliding into the seat across from him. Rick didn't return her greeting. I saw them at your house last night, he said instead. Those bikers. Him. They just brought over some food. Don't. Rick's hand clenched around his coffee mug. Don't try to make it sound innocent. That Mick guy has been hanging around you for weeks now. Everyone in town is talking about it. Rick, it's not what you think. Then what is it? His voice rose slightly, drawing looks from nearby tables. He lowered it again, leaning forward. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like this guy swooped in and turned your head. We were doing fine before he showed up. Were we? Clara asked quietly. Really? Rick's face reddened. So this is his doing. He's gotten into your head, made you think what we have isn't good enough. Mick hasn't done anything, Clara protested. This isn't about him. Like hell it isn't. Rick's fist came down on the table, making the silverware rattle. I've seen how he looks at you, Clara, and now you're different, distant. You're not the same person anymore. Maybe that's the point, Clara said, her voice trembling. Maybe I'm finally figuring out who I really am. Because of him, Rick spat. He's manipulating you. Can't you see that? Those bikers, they're not good people, Clara. They're dangerous. You don't know them, Clara defended, feeling caught between loyalty to her new friends and guilt over hurting Rick. You don't know Mick. And you do? Rick's eyes were hard now. After a few weeks of charity events and surprise visits? I've known you for years, Clara. We have history. And you're throwing it away for some biker who probably sees you as just another conquest. Clara felt tears pricking at her eyes, torn between anger at Rick's accusations and uncertainty about her own feelings. The situation was spiraling out of control, and she felt powerless to stop it. Clara's hands trembled as she pushed open the diner door, stepping into the cool evening air. Rick's words echoed in her mind, a jumble of accusations and hurt that made her chest tight. She couldn't bear to look back, knowing he was probably still watching her through the window. Instead of heading home, she walked toward the small park across the street. The familiar path brought her to a wooden bench overlooking the duck pond. She sat down heavily, wrapping her arms around herself as the evening breeze rustled through the trees. You're throwing it away for some biker, Rick had said. But what exactly was she throwing away? Clara stared at her reflection in the pond's surface, watching it ripple and distort with each gust of wind. Her relationship with Rick had been comfortable, predictable, like a well-worn sweater that no longer quite fit but was too familiar to discard. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Clara remembered how Mick had pointed out a similar sunset just yesterday, describing the colors with an unexpected poetry that had made her smile. He wasn't what Rick thought he was. He wasn't what anyone thought he was. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her recent messages. Rick's texts were full of question marks and demands for attention. Mick's were different, sharing random thoughts about his day, asking about hers, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. Maybe I am different now, Clara whispered to herself, thinking about Rick's accusation. The Clara from 2 months ago would never have imagined herself friends with a group of bikers. She would never have dared to step out of her carefully constructed routine. But was different bad? Clara watched a family of ducks paddle across the pond, the little ones following their mother in a perfect line. She thought about the veterans at Mick's fundraiser, how their faces lit up when they talked about the support they'd received from the motorcycle club. She remembered Frank's stories about how Mick had helped him through his darkest days after returning from deployment. The comfortable life she'd built felt increasingly like a cage. Rick represented everything safe and familiar, the life everyone expected her to want. A nice house in a small town, a steady relationship with a reliable man. No surprises or complications. Yet every time Mick smiled at her, every time he shared another piece of his story, Clara felt something she'd never experienced with Rick. A spark of excitement, a sense of possibility. With Mick, she felt seen, not just as the quiet librarian everyone expected her to be, but as someone capable of more. Still, doubt gnawed at her. Was she being foolish? Trading security for uncertainty? The practical part of her mind warned that relationships built on excitement rarely lasted. But then she remembered how Mick had sat with her at the fundraiser, patiently explaining his passion for helping veterans. The depth of feeling in his voice when he talked about making a difference. Clara pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. Her feelings for Mick weren't just about excitement or rebellion. There was something real there. Something that scared her precisely because it mattered so much. But Rick's words had struck a nerve. Did she really know Mick? Could she trust these feelings that had developed so quickly? Clara watched the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the trees, leaving her with more questions than answers. She stood up slowly, her legs stiff from sitting too long. The decision loomed before her like a fork in the road. The safe, familiar path or the one that both thrilled and terrified her. Either way, she couldn't keep standing at the crossroads forever. The next evening, Clara found herself sitting across from Mick, at Frank's diner. The place was nearly empty, save for a couple of truckers at the counter. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting a warm glow on their booth. "I appreciate you meeting me here," Mick said, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. He looked different tonight, more vulnerable somehow, without his leather jacket and away from his usual crowd. "After what happened with Rick yesterday." "Well, Frank told me you might need someone to talk to." Clara nodded, stirring her tea absently. "I've been doing a lot of thinking." "Yeah?" Mick's voice was gentle. "About what?" "About everything. About you." Clara looked up, meeting his eyes. "I feel like I know you, but then sometimes I wonder if I really do." Mick was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "Fair enough. What do you want to know?" "Tell me about the PTSD," Clara said softly. "You mentioned it before, but we never really talked about it." Mick's fingers tightened around his cup. "It's not pretty," he warned. "Some nights, I still wake up thinking I'm back there. The sounds, the smells. They come back like it was yesterday." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Lost 3 of my closest friends over there. When I came back, I couldn't handle regular life. Everything felt wrong, empty." Clara reached across the table, touching his hand gently. "Is that when you joined the Angels?" "Not right away," Mick said. "First I tried drinking it away. Then I tried isolating myself. Nothing worked. Frank found me at my lowest point. I was living out of my truck, couldn't hold down a job." He smiled slightly. He recognized the look in my eyes. Said he'd seen it in the mirror. "What changed?" "Frank showed me that helping others could help me too. The motorcycle club. It gave me structure, purpose. These guys became my new unit." Mick's voice grew stronger. "The charity work started small, just visiting other vets, letting them know they weren't alone. Then it grew into something bigger." Clara watched as Mick's face lit up, talking about the veterans programs he'd helped develop. The passion in his voice was unmistakable. "I still have bad days," he admitted. "Sometimes the memories hit hard, but now I know how to handle them better. And I've got people who understand." "Does it scare you?" Clara asked. "Letting someone new into your life?" Mick met her gaze steadily. "Terrifies me. But you know what scares me more? Not taking the chance when something real comes along." Clara felt her heart skip. "How do you know when something's real?" "When it makes you want to be better," Mick said simply. "When it challenges you but accepts you exactly as you are." He paused, then added quietly, "When you find yourself sharing things you never thought you'd tell anyone." Clara thought about Rick's perfectly planned dates, his predictable conversations. Then she thought about Mick. Complicated, scarred, but utterly genuine. Every revelation about his past didn't push her away. It only made her understand him better. "I'm not perfect, Clara," Mick continued. "I've got demons I still fight. Some days are harder than others, but I promise you this. I'll always be honest about who I am." Looking at him now, Clara saw everything. His strength and his vulnerability, his rough edges, and his gentle heart. She realized that she wasn't just falling for the idea of him, but for all of him, imperfections and all. I wouldn't want you to be perfect, she said softly, squeezing his hand. The local coffee shop buzzed with its usual morning crowd as Clara waited at a corner table. Her hands wrapped tightly around her cup of tea, drawing comfort from its warmth. Through the window, she watched people hurrying past, going about their daily routines, while her own world felt like it was about to shift. The bell above the door chimed, and Rick walked in. He spotted her immediately, and Clara noticed how his face brightened, making what she had to do even harder. He was wearing his work clothes, dark blue coveralls with his name stitched above the pocket, probably on his break from the garage. "Hey," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "I was surprised to get your message." Clara forced herself to meet his eyes. "Thank you for coming, Rick. I know you're busy at work. For you, I can always make time." He smiled, but it faded as he noticed her serious expression. "What's going on, Clara?" She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I need to be honest with you, Rick. You deserve that much." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I can't continue seeing you. It wouldn't be fair to either of us." Rick's shoulders tensed. He looked down at the table, then back up at her. "It's because of him, isn't it? The biker?" "It's because of me," Clara said gently. "Mick, he's part of it, yes. But this is about being true to myself. You're a wonderful person, Rick. You're kind, stable, dependable, but not exciting enough?" There was a hint of bitterness in his voice. Clara shook her head. "That's not it. We want different things. You want someone who fits into the life you've built, someone who shares your vision of the future. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm realizing I need something else." Rick was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming against the table. "I could change," he offered. "We could try new things, be more spontaneous." "Don't," Clara interrupted softly. "Don't change who you are for someone else. You deserve someone who loves you exactly as you are." The morning sun streaming through the window caught the disappointment in Rick's eyes. He sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I really thought we had something special." "We did have something," Clara agreed. "But sometimes special isn't enough. Sometimes it's about timing, and about being honest about what we really want." Rick nodded slowly, processing her words. The silence between them stretched out, filled with the clinking of cups and murmured conversations from other tables. Finally, he spoke. "I won't pretend this doesn't hurt," he said. "But I appreciate your honesty, and I hope—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Clara. Even if it's not with me." Clara felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. This was the Rick she'd always liked, the one who could be genuine and kind, even in difficult moments. "Thank you," she whispered. They stood up together, awkwardly facing each other. Rick hesitated for a moment, then pulled her into a brief, gentle hug. "Take care of yourself," he said, stepping back. Clara watched as he walked out of the coffee shop, the bell chiming one last time. She sat back down, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. Relief washed over her. Relief at being honest, at making a clear choice. But there was sadness, too. For the end of something that could have been. For having to hurt someone who had only ever been good to her. She took one last sip of her now cold tea, gathered her things, and stepped out into the morning sun. It was time to move forward. The late afternoon sun painted golden streaks through the trees as Clara walked along the park's winding path. Her heart quickened when she spotted Mick sitting on a wooden bench near the duck pond. He wore his usual leather jacket, but had traded his typical biker gear for jeans and a plain white t-shirt. He stood as she approached, and Clara noticed how his face softened when their eyes met. "Hey there, librarian," he said with that gentle smile she'd grown so fond of. "Hi," Clara replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The breeze carried the sweet scent of nearby flowering cherry trees. They sat together on the bench, watching a family of ducks glide across the pond's surface. The peaceful scene felt worlds away from their first chaotic meeting with 50 bikers in her front yard. "So," Mick began, his voice carrying a hint of uncertainty she rarely heard from him. "I wanted to talk about us. About where we go from here." Clara turned to face him, drawing one leg up onto the bench. "I ended things with Rick today," she said softly. Mick nodded slowly. "How did he take it?" "Better than I expected. He was hurt, but understanding." Clara watched a leaf dance its way to the ground. "I think we both knew it wasn't right." "And us?" Mick asked, his eyes searching hers. "What feels right about us?" Clara thought carefully before answering. Everything about you terrified me at first, she admitted with a small laugh. The motorcycle, the leather, the whole Hell's Angels thing. But then I got to know you. The real you. The way you care for others, how you help veterans, your patience with me. She paused, gathering her thoughts. You pushed me out of my comfort zone without pushing me away. Mick reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Listen, Clara. I know my life isn't exactly conventional. The fundraisers, the rides, the late nights. It can be a lot. I want you to know we can take this as slow as you need. But, Clara prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice. But I'm all in, he said firmly. Whatever that means for us. Whether it's quiet evenings at your place or cross-country rides with the gang. I just want you there with me. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. Even though I'm just a boring librarian? Mick chuckled, squeezing her hand. Boring? The woman who accidentally sexted a Hell's Angel and then handled 50 bikers showing up at her door? I don't think so. They shared a laugh, and Clara felt the last of her tension melt away. The ducks had paddled closer to their bench, perhaps hoping for breadcrumbs, and the setting sun cast long shadows across the grass. I want to try, Clara said, meeting his gaze. I want to see where this goes. And yes, maybe taking it. Slow at first would be good, but... She smiled. I'm not afraid anymore. Mick's face lit up with genuine joy. He pulled her closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Clara leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt truly excited about what lay ahead. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. The future might be uncertain, but Clara knew one thing for sure. She was exactly where she wanted to be. The community center buzzed with activity as Clara walked through the entrance, Mick's steady presence beside her. The annual spring fair had transformed the usually plain space into a vibrant gathering spot, with colorful banners hanging from the ceiling and local vendors' booths lining the walls. You okay? Mick asked, his hand finding the small of her back. Clara smiled, realizing she felt more than okay. Actually, yes. Really good. For once, she wasn't overthinking every detail, or worried about what others might think. Several of Mick's biker friends were already there, manning a booth for their veterans' charity. They waved enthusiastically when they spotted the couple. Clara noticed how natural it felt now, being part of their world. Clara, Frank called out from behind the booth. Come help us convince this stubborn kid that our raffle is worth entering. She made her way over, Mick following with an amused grin. A young man in his early 20s stood at the booth, looking uncertain. Clara recognized the haunted look in his eyes. She'd seen it before in some of the veterans who came to her library. Hi there, she said warmly. I'm Clara. Are you interested in the raffle? The young man shifted his weight. I don't know. I just got back from overseas and... He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Clara nodded, understanding. Well, all the proceeds go directly to helping veterans like yourself. Plus, she added, with a gentle smile, these guys may look tough, but they're actually big softies who know exactly what you're going through. Mick squeezed her shoulder, pride evident in his expression. The young veteran cracked a small smile, and Clara watched as Frank engaged him in conversation about his service. As they moved through the fair, several people stopped to chat. Clara was surprised to realize she knew most of them now, not just from the library, but from various charity events and community gatherings she'd attended with Mick. She'd somehow become part of both worlds without even noticing. They paused at a food vendor, and Mick bought them both hot dogs. As they sat at a picnic table to eat, Clara watched families and couples milling around, the afternoon sun streaming through the high windows. Penny for your thoughts? Mick asked, nudging her gently. I was just thinking about how different everything feels now, she replied. A few months ago, I would have been hiding in a corner at an event like this, if I came at all. Now it feels... natural? Mick supplied. Yeah. Clara took a bite of her hot dog, considering, like I finally found where I belong, not just with you, but with this whole community. It's like I was living in this tiny, safe bubble before, and now you're living. Mick finished, his eyes warm. Clara nodded. Exactly. And the crazy thing is, I'm not scared anymore. Well, maybe a little, she amended with a laugh. But it's a good kind of scared, an exciting kind. Mick reached across the table and took her hand. You know what I see when I look at you now? What? I see someone who's finally letting herself shine. You were always amazing, Clara. You just needed to believe it yourself. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. Around them, the fair continued its cheerful bustle. She could hear Frank's booming laugh from the charity booth, children squealing with delight at the face-painting station, and the general hum of community life. She squeezed Mick's hand, feeling the strength of his grip, the steadiness of his presence. In that moment, Clara knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And for the first time in her life, that thought didn't frighten her at all. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky as Clara and Mick left the spring fair. The warmth of the day still lingered in the air, and a gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of blooming wildflowers from the nearby fields. Mick turned to Clara, his eyes twinkling with that familiar mix of mischief and tenderness. You know what would make this day even better? What's that? Clara asked, already feeling a flutter of excitement in her stomach. She'd come to recognize that particular look in his eyes. It usually meant an adventure was brewing. How about we take a ride? Mick gestured toward his motorcycle, which gleamed in the late afternoon light. The countryside's beautiful this time of day, and I know some perfect back roads. Clara glanced at the motorcycle. Just a few months ago, the thought of climbing onto one would have sent her running in the opposite direction. But now, looking at Mick's extended hand and the promise of adventure in his smile, she felt only anticipation. I'd love to, she said, surprising herself with how quickly and naturally the words came. Mick's face lit up. He walked over to his bike and pulled out a spare helmet, handling it with careful attention. Safety first, he said, helping her adjust the straps. His fingers were gentle as they brushed against her chin, making sure everything was secure. You'll want to hold on tight, he instructed, mounting the bike. And lean with me when we take the curves. Don't fight the bike's movement, just trust it, like dancing. Clara climbed on behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. She could feel the solid warmth of him through his leather jacket, steady and reassuring. The motorcycle rumbled to life beneath them, its deep purr vibrating through her entire body. Ready? Mick called over his shoulder. Ready, Clara answered, tightening her grip slightly. They pulled out onto the main road, but Mick soon turned onto a less traveled route that wound through the rolling hills. The wind whipped past them, and Clara felt a surge of pure joy as they accelerated. The countryside opened up around them, endless fields of green dotted with splashes of wildflower color, old barns standing sentinel against the horizon, and trees swaying gently in the breeze. As they rode, Clara remembered her old life, the quiet safety of her routine, the predictable comfort of her everyday existence. It hadn't been bad, exactly, but it had been incomplete. She'd been incomplete, too afraid to reach for what she really wanted. Now, with the wind in her face and her arms around Mick, she felt truly alive. Each curve in the road brought a new vista. Each moment held the promise of something wonderful. She found herself laughing into the wind, the sound carrying away behind them. Mick reached down with one hand and squeezed her knee briefly, a silent acknowledgement of her joy. Clara leaned forward, pressing herself closer against his back as they took another curve. She wasn't fighting the movement anymore. She was part of it, flowing with the bike's rhythm just as naturally as breathing. The countryside stretched endlessly before them, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Clara felt her heart soar with the simple pleasure of the moment. The warmth of Mick's body, the thrill of speed, the beauty of the landscape rushing past. This was what she'd been looking for all along. Not just love, but the courage to embrace life's adventures, to let herself be truly free. The motorcycle carried them forward, eating up the miles as they rode into the gathering dusk. Clara had never felt more certain about anything in her life. This was exactly where she was meant to be. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.